2 years after joining Troop 15 at Trinity Methodist Church, Junie Ford earned his Eagle Scout badge. Working a summer job at Fort Mackinac on a picturesque island in the straits between Lakes Huron and Michigan, he discovered a knack for meeting and liking people. Everybody has more good things about them than bad things, he explained to a schoolmate. If you accentuate the good things, you can like him even though he or she has some bad qualities. If you have that attitude, you never hate anybody. His positive outlook was put to a severe test in the spring of 1930. Flipping hamburgers at a local grill, the 16-year-old Ford was interrupted one day by a stranger who announced, "I'm Leslie King, your father. Can I take you to lunch?" The ensuing meal was an awkward affair, hardly eased by King's gift of $25 to the son he had barely acknowledged. Then he vanished, the proverbial deadbeat dad, leaving in his wake a confused, unhappy youngster who cried himself to sleep that night. It may be coincidental, but about this time, Ford developed a boyhood stutter. He also displayed a ferocious temper, imperfectly controlled with the help of his mother. Dorothy Ford gave her eldest son a copy of Rudyard Kipling's inspirational poem, If, accompanied by a stern admonition to channel his anger along more constructive lines. Her advice took. For the rest of his life, Gerald Ford demanded more of himself than he did of others. Few guessed at the harsh self-discipline behind his genial exterior. At South High School, deliberately chosen over rivals with less ethnic, racial, and economic diversity, he endured Latin, excelled at history and government. He ran unsuccessfully for president of the South High student government on the Progressive Party ticket. It was his last electoral defeat for 45 years. In compensation, classmates designated him most popular in a contest sponsored by a local movie theater. His prize was a train trip to the nation's capital. Politics aside, it was as an athlete that he excelled, winning medals in basketball and track, and becoming captain of a football team that carried off the state championship in 1930. At the University of Michigan, he more than held his own academically. But it was on the gridiron that he made a name for himself. Voted outstanding freshman player, Ford went on to be named most valuable on a 1934 team whose punt, pass, and a prayer offense he later mined for laughs. He found nothing amusing, however, about the treatment accorded his teammate Willis Ward, an African-American and a close friend with whom he roomed on the road. He was angered, Ford was, by the refusal of opponent Georgia Tech to share the field with a black athlete. He considered boycotting the game in protest, until Ward convinced him to put the team's interest first. Thus motivated, Ford excelled in the only Wolverine victory of the season. In June 1935, he received his BA degree in political science and economics. According to the Michigan yearbook, he was the best student on the football squad. Moreover, he didn't smoke, drink, or swear. Quote, "We can't find anything really nasty to say about him," concluded the editors. Neither could the Green Bay Packers or Detroit Lions, each of whom scouted the promising center who had already been invited to play in the Shriners East-West charity game. In the ensuing bidding war, Ford was offered the princely sum of $2,400 per season, with free transportation to and from the football field. He chose, of course, instead to go to Yale. He wanted to be a lawyer, and he wanted to go to Yale. And Yale in the 1930s was a place of great ferment, but it was also a place of, in some ways, recidivist political views. It was the heart of isolation in America. It was at Yale that America First was founded, and Gerald Ford, being a good Midwesterner, joined America First. Along with people like his hometown senator, Arthur Vandenberg. He believed that the United States had been placed behind two oceans like moats to divinely protect us from contamination with the old world, an old world which had dragged us into one world war already and threatened to repeat history. Well, needless to say, his isolationism did not survive for long. In fact, it didn't survive Pearl Harbor. I think of all the things he was proud of, and there were many things, justifiably, I think one thing he took great pride in was his career in the Navy. On a carrier in the South Pacific called the Monterey. He came back from the war having undergone a road to Damascus experience, as indeed had Senator Vandenberg. And I've often thought, I don't know for a fact, I've often thought that Vandenberg, who was a real hero to him and to his family, I think Vandenberg in some ways took the lead in casting off isolationism, and I think Ford found it easier in some ways to follow in his wake. He came back, and of course, in 1948, he decided to enter politics for the best of reasons. Not simply because he was ambitious, although he was ambitious. He entered politics because he had an idea, which many people thought at that point was an unpopular idea. The idea being that America could no longer bury its head in the sand. And in the post-war world, we could not repeat the mistake that we had made after World War I, pretending that if we only stayed uninvolved, the rest of the world would leave us alone. Vandenberg had come to that conclusion. Ford came to that conclusion. It prompted him to run against a moss-back, isolationist, incumbent Republican who believed the world ended at Terre Haute. If indeed it extended beyond the Michigan line. It was widely assumed that it was a suicide mission on Ford's part. In the end, he out-hustled, out-campaigned, out-argued his opponent, won the primary by 2-1. But of course, it's not only a seat in Congress that he won in 1948, it was Betty Bloomer of Grand Rapids. Famously, he said to her early in the year that I want to marry you, but I can't tell you when, and I can't tell you why I can't tell you. And I tell you, the love must have been pretty strong for her to have said, okay. Well, with the primary out of the way, it's a Republican seat, and he had wanted to take the incumbent by surprise. He did. So they were married in the middle of October of 1948. According to family legend, the future president showed up wearing one black shoe and one brown. I never could quite get a straight answer, but he didn't deny it. So I take his non-denial as a non-denial. Their honeymoon consisted of a trip to Owasso and sitting, it gets worse. It was a cold October. Once in a while, October is cold in West End, Michigan. And so they went to Owasso, which was the hometown of Thomas E. Dewey, who under the best of circumstances did not oratorically set fire to his audiences. And in this particular instance, it was an outdoor arena, outdoor stadium, like football stadium, by no means filled, at night on a cold, blustery. Anyway, the president said 50 years later that Mrs. Ford had never let him forget it. Because then when they came back, they also, of course, went to a Michigan football game. And then they came back to Grand Rapids. And he said, you know, honey, would you mind fixing me a couple sandwiches this evening? Because I really ought to go out and campaign. And I think it was a preview, needless to say, of coming attractions.